I get the opportunity to have a lot of conversations here, and sometimes those conversations are just fun. They're just plain old flat out fun. Then other times they're really moving and meaningful and maybe even move us to emotion. But other times those programs and those conversations are just informative, like necessary. We need to know what we're talking about. And today we're having one of those conversations. You're gonna need to pull up a chair. You, your spouse, if you have a teenager, make your teenager pull up a chair because this conversation really could save their life and yours. Stay tuned. I see the title of this book that I'm holding in my hands, Almost Gone is the name of this book, Almost Gone. The name of it makes a chill run up and down my spine because I'm looking at a teenage daughter, a beautiful teenage daughter and her parents. They love her, they have high hopes for her. She has dreams and aspirations for herself, but in a moment, everything begins to unravel. And in the weeks and months that follow, things begin to change to where this beautiful young lady is almost gone. And the reason why it makes a chill run down my spine is because I have teenage sons now. And I'm thinking about the fact that they could be, your kid could be in a predicament much like you're about to hear today. I'm so glad that she's not gone, that she's here to tell us her story because it really could save lives, the lives that matter most to you. So would you please help me to welcome MacKenzie and her mother to the program today. Hey, I'm glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having us.
I'm glad you guys are here. Thank you. You've got a story to tell, young lady.
I do.
You do. This is you on the cover. You got your cap and gown on.
Yeah.
You look proud. Your parents look proud, but there's a story behind all of this and you getting into this stage in your life.
Right.
So just tell us what happened.
Okay. Well, it was my senior year of high school. This was 2013. And I was just talking with somebody on an online chat site with me and my best friend. And we just started talking very innocently with this guy, and we added each other on Facebook. After a couple of weeks, we started talking a little bit more and a little bit more. And after a couple of months, I started having some feelings for him. And then slowly over these months, he would begin to manipulate me and pull me away from my friends and my family. Ultimately, I even converted religions in order to be with him.
Okay, now I'm going to stop you for just 1 second so you can back up and slow down this story and this experience for us, okay? So when you say he was pulling you away from your friends and pulling you away from your family, this is someone you've not seen in person. So this is just an internet relationship. What does that look like for him to pull you away from your friends and your family?
Well, one thing that is important to note is that we did like Skype. So I did see him, and we would talk, after a while, we would talk hours a day. And so, for example, he would tell me, he really started eroding my foundation. He would tell me my friends weren't maybe good for me, maybe they really weren't people I should have in my life. And these were my best friends that I had had forever, but a lot of my friends were guys. And so he was telling me, maybe you shouldn't be hanging around with all these guy friends and whatnot. And I started believing him over time. And he'd start telling me that my family wasn't good for me, and maybe they don't understand you. And I didn't believe him at first, of course, same with my friends. And once we would have a disagreement, my family and I would tell him about it later. And it could be months later, but I would tell him.
And he would use that as ammunition to sort of.
I told you. Yeah, he'd say, I told you your family didn't understand.
And how old are you when this is happening?
I was 17 and I turned 18.
Okay, so 17, 18 years old, when you're looking for validation, you're wanting a little independence and freedom, those hours that she's spending, were you aware at all that she's having a conversation with someone online?
No, and that's what, looking back, I look back over this many, many times and try to figure out how that went on in some ways right under our noses.
How many years ago was this?
3.5.
So this is fairly recent. Okay, so 3.5 years ago. Go ahead.
Yeah, because, we had all those controls in the house. If the computers stay downstairs in the common area, can't take them up to your bedroom. We had the parental controls on the computers. We looked at history. We looked at texting every now and then, that kind of thing. So we really thought, we've got that locked down and didn't ever think beyond that.
Yeah.
We had also told we have 3 kids, and we told all of them, be careful who you talk to. We made them, MacKenzie in particular, I think 3 different times, go through her Facebook friends and delete people that she didn't or couldn't tell us who they were. So we thought we had a good control around that. The problem was much of this was done on her phone, which we now, we didn't have controls around that. We were thinking about the laptops at home, and went on away from the house. So she would go to work and get off work and then sit in the parking lot and talk with him on her phone before she came home. So we had no idea any of that was going on.
Okay, so MacKenzie, you're spending hours talking to this guy. He's filling your head with what he wants to fill your head with. And how does this progress?
Well, so like I said, I had eventually even converted religions, and this was over 14 months. And so it did not start, so aggressively, and if it had started with him telling me what to do or whatnot, I would have obviously just said, I don't want to talk to you anymore. But it was this slow, it just started as a friendship, and then over 6 months later, I started, kind of having these feelings, started really getting attached to him. So over this time, I started attending a mosque, and
So wait a minute, you're attending a mosque like around your hometown, apparently.
Yeah. So it was not too far from our hometown, but it would be the same thing. I would tell my mom I'm going to go see my friends, and I wouldn't. I would go there, and it was for him because he told me. We can't be together unless you are Muslim. And I said, well, I don't want to be Muslim, And he said, okay, well, just go to a mosque and just see it, just ask him about it or whatnot. So I went because I felt like I loved him. And so I knew that was a big part of his life. And so I told him, okay, I'll just go to learn more about you. And I kind of equate it to stepping into a river that is way deeper and way faster than I thought. I thought I could handle the situation.
Your legs are just wiped out.
Right, and now by attending a mosque or just more having real people now that knew about me and knew about him, it was no longer just virtual. I couldn't just turn off the computer anymore. Now I had people in real life that knew about us. And
How did, you mean the people at the mosque? How did they know about the two of you?
I told them.
Yeah.
So they were wondering why I was interested, and so I told them about him, and I felt like these people were distant, like they were far enough away, they would never talk to my family, and so it was kind of nice to have somebody
Have a community
know,
of people to
you know
celebrate this relationship.
Yeah, and so over this time, he originally started, back when we first started talking within like a month, he said, do you think we could ever meet in Dallas? And I said, and that's my hometown. And I said, I guess if you ever come to Dallas, if you make the whole trip from Kosovo, which is where he's from.
Okay. Where is Kosovo?
It's like the Balkan region of Europe. So
Okay.
not a great area, but.
And how old is this guy?
He is 22. So I was 18, he was 22.
Okay.
Very handsome, and he looked like European.
Just charming, yeah.
Yeah, he just looked European, and just like a friend, And so I said, he said next summer, so a year from now, if I can come to Dallas, would you meet me? And I said, if you make the trip all the way there, all the way to here, then sure, I guess I can meet you for coffee. And, but I really didn't even believe we'd be talking a year from now. I knew that I really shouldn't be talking to somebody I don't know online. I knew that was kind of weird.
Your parents had told you that before. You've been through all of this.
100 times,
Yeah.
and I knew it, and so I told him, whatever, if you ever get here, sure, I guess we can meet for coffee in Plano, Texas, my own little town. And
your friends, none of your girlfriends at school or your guy friends at school, nobody knew other than the folks at the mosque that you're talking to this guy and getting into a serious relationship.
Well, I was with my friend, Madison, who was there with me when we met on the computer. So she knew I was talking to him. And my friend group of about 9 people, they kind of knew after a couple months that I was still talking to this guy. And they, they kind of well, that's kind of weird. Why are you still talking to him? And I was like, we're just friends, whatever. But I had 3 friends, Jordan, Madison, and Sarah, who knew more. But I would say Madison knew the most because we were best friends. We did everything together. But through this year, I would try to distance, myself from them and whatnot. But so I told him we could meet in Dallas, and then a couple months later, I started getting attached to that idea. I thought, I really wanted to meet him. Started thinking maybe it would happen. And then he told me, hey, I don't have enough money to meet in Dallas. Do you think you could meet me in New York? And I was going to graduate, I was going to be a senior, and I thought, or I was going to be in college, and so I started thinking, maybe it'd kind of be fun to get some friends, like our last trip together, we could go to New York, it'd be kind of fun, we could meet there. So I started getting attached to that idea, and over this time, this was months apart, and I started really falling for him and really kind of wanting to actually see him.
You're trusting him, yeah.
And so once I got really attached to that idea, he told me, hey, I don't have enough money to go to New York. I can only meet you in Switzerland. And that's a really big jump from New York, obviously. But a little backstory, I was planning on going to Switzerland anyways. My parents knew about it. My aunt had a foreign exchange student that lived with her, and we were friends, and she lived in Switzerland.
Okay.
So we were going to go there.
So you have connection
there.
there.
Yeah, so I felt like, and I was going to go there for a month, for like a big graduation trip for myself. And so I thought, Switzerland's safe, I've heard, and maybe if I'm with her family, it won't be that bad to meet him there. And by this point, I thought I loved him. And then up to the point where we had been talking for a year, and I was about to leave in like 2 months, and he said, hey, I don't have enough money for Switzerland. I'm sorry. If we're going to be together, you have to come to Kosovo. And at first I said no. It's like, there's no way. I know, like, I'm not going to do that. But after a while, I kind of looked around. I had changed religions. I had pushed away my family. I didn't have my friends anymore. I felt like I had done so much to be with him. I couldn't just back out anymore.
Your heart's all entangled in it.
Right, yeah. And so I kind of looked around, and I was just like, I have nothing here. He's my whole life, so I have to go. And
are you seeing, before you finish the story and keep going, because I know you got a lot more to tell us, but looking back on this phase of it, were you seeing the distance, and what did it read to you? What were you thinking was going on with her?
Absolutely. We early on, that summer after her junior year is when all of this started, and we immediately began to see a change in MacKenzie. I mean, a kid that was always coming in with, 9 kids in tow, in and out of the house, everybody laughing and cutting up and playing Xbox and things like that. Suddenly, all those kids were gone. And MacKenzie, she'd always been one to push the envelope. We were always growing up, always pulling her back a little bit. You're not quite old enough to do that.
Sound like me, girl.
Yeah.
Sound like me, yeah.
You need to wait. Always want more independence than she should have, things like that. But for the most part, pretty typical things. But all of a sudden, she and I used to spend a lot of time together, and she just didn't want to anymore. And then, of course, the religion thing became a huge debate in our home.
So you did know that after a while she was now talking about this new religion?
Yeah, she first came home one day and out of the blue just asked if she could buy a Quran. And that kind of blew us away. I mean, we were a devout Christian family, go to church she'd been in church since she was 6 weeks old, And, but we thought, well, she's met some friends, she has an interest in it, and she said she wanted to kind of compare the two religions. And my husband and I talked about it, and we really thought this was kind of the beginning of a journey, right? A lot of times, kids that age kind of have to figure out why they believe what they believe. So we thought, okay, if we help guide her through this, and my husband had a lot of commentaries and things we gave to her, and he said, come to me with questions. But it very quickly went from discussions to kind of debates to really all-out arguments and discussions about theology. And then the pulling away from us, the pulling away from even our extended family, friends were no longer around. I describe it as often, it was as if someone almost overnight came in and just took my fun-loving daughter away, who was always wanting to experience anything new, and put someone in her place that we didn't even recognize.
So you're 2 months out from this trip. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and I was ready to go. Basically, I had a passport. I had everything I needed. And I mean, really, the story kind of turns over to you, because all of a sudden I was actually 3 days away. All this time I'd been prepping. And I was 3 days away from leaving. And I finished my last final exam of my senior year, and I was ready to go. And I was very conflicted. In the book we talk about that all the time, or I talk about it a lot. I lay at night, and sometimes I'd think, like, what am I doing? Is this really what I want?
Yeah.
And then it kind of goes back to well, you've done this, you've done all this, you've torn your family apart. You can't just walk down the stairs and say, never mind, I'm sorry for everything I did, It doesn't work that way.
That's what's so scary about this sort of thing, is that you've got a rational, logical, smart, bright teenager.
With lots of dreams.
Well, we'll
with
say
lots of
rational kind of
dreams.
loosely. I mean, let's like not
But
lose sight of the big
before
picture.
that.
It's so cryptic. It's
Yes.
so sneaky. It's so easy to become entangled in something.
See, that's what's so,
that takes you
so
away.
interesting about, that's what manipulation is. You don't even realize you've been manipulated. You don't realize your mind has changed. It's, you rationalize that in your mind to where this is now the truth to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's, you know, I say many times, if I had told MacKenzie, you are being a victim, she would have said, no, I'm not. She didn't feel like a victim. There
'Cause
was
she loved
nothing
him.
in her world that felt like a victim.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of picks up too, because I was told that. I had finished my senior year, walked out to my car, and my mom was there at my car, and which has never happened ever. And I said, what are you doing? And she said, well, MacKenzie, like there's, 4 FBI agents at our house right now, and they want to talk to you. And she's like, what did you do? And I said, and I was like, and I remember thinking, I didn't know why. Like, I knew that I was doing something kind of bizarre.
But it didn't connect to
right,
the
but
FBI
there was
in your
no
mind.
radicalization, anything like that. And I did not understand why the FBI would be at my house.
Yeah.
And the only thing I could maybe think of that was illegal was
It's actually a felony.
well, okay. And so I had gotten a replacement passport. We had a regular passport, and it was in our family like drawer. And I checked it every night to see if it was there. And well, we'll come back to it later actually. But my mom had moved it, and I had gone to the drawer that night, and I had looked, and it was gone. And that was the only. And I remember thinking to myself, if there's no passport, there's no Adam, which was that guy. And
Can
so
I stop you to ask why you couldn't tell her? Why couldn't you tell her that you knew?
Yeah, that's a whole story unto itself.
Okay, so we're going to have to get to that because I also want to know how you found out. Okay,
Right, okay.
So go ahead, MacKenzie, and then we'll get to Mom.
And so I researched really quickly, and I realized that because I only had a couple, weeks now, and I didn't know if I could get a whole new passport in that time frame before I was supposed to leave. So I researched it, and I could get a replacement passport expedited really quickly. So I ended up getting that, and you can figure it.
Well, and the reason that she put on her application was that it was lost, and it really wasn't. So technically, that's a felony, which later down the road was what the FBI was able to use to kind of
So that's
help
like
us.
why they were able to insert themselves into the situation. It wasn't because there was technically like a law broken.
Yeah.
So the FBI is there at your house. You come home, and?
So I walk in the door, and there's 4 agents sitting there, and Agent Sheridan is the one that actually ended up working with my parents this whole time, and he is a very large man. And the FBI is like exactly how you would think they are. They're
I was
all,
just picturing, do they have FBI written on the back
Okay,
in
they have
yellow?
their badges, obviously, and they all pulled up in 4 individual. They couldn't carpool for some reason, but like.
This
they
is
pulled
intense.
They pulled up in their black vans, and Agent Sheridan, if Criminal Minds, I don't know if you know that show, but he looks like Hotch, like the main guy. And, but that is exactly how they are. And so, I mean, I have always felt pretty confident in myself. Even through this time, I wouldn't really allow myself to feel like small. But when Agent Sheridan was there and all these FBI agents, I felt very tiny at this time.
Yeah.
And they basically told me, I didn't know that my parents knew at this time. And they said, MacKenzie, we are here because we know what you're doing, and we're going to ask you a bunch of questions, and a lot of which we already know the answers to, so don't lie to us.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. And he said, and if you do lie to us, and he pulled out a piece of paper, and he said, these are your Miranda rights. And if, we can use this to take you out in handcuffs if we chose. So don't lie. And I said, okay. And so they proceeded to ask me questions about, and they really just drew what I was doing out of me, because I didn't want to tell anybody, and I didn't think my parents knew at this time. And so they said, okay, MacKenzie, what are you planning on doing? And I said, well, I'm going to leave the country. And just question after question after question, to finally they said, who are you meeting? What are you planning on doing when you get there? And I said, I'm planning on marrying this guy. I'm engaged, you could say. And Mom and Dad, you don't know this guy, you know nothing about this, but I'm so sorry. And they told me, okay, do not talk to this guy anymore. We have been to that part of the world. It is not a good place for you to be. And we fully believe this is not a good situation if you went over there. So they left, and I ran upstairs right after that, and I called him. And I said, what are you doing? You know, like, what did you do? The FBI is at my house. And of course he said, I don't know, like, what are you talking about and whatnot? But it kind of goes back to the manipulation thing. I had FBI agents telling me, this man would probably hurt you if you go over there. This is not a good situation for you. And never talked to him again. And of course, I ran upstairs and I called him immediately.
Did the FBI agents tell you what they suspected? There were two things I think that they suspected he had planned.
Right. Well, Kosovo is number 2 in the world for human sex trafficking. And so that was a very likely scenario, and the way things were kind of going, it may have been that. It also could have been citizenship scam, because we had planned to go there, get married, and come back to the U.S.
Mm-hmm. So tell us, Mom, how did you find out?
Well, we were still struggling with what we thought was rebellion, right? And the change in personality and all that kind of thing. And then probably I think one of God's blessings was to have my husband on the East Coast on a business trip. And I was home with the kids. And he gets a phone call from MacKenzie's one of her best friends' dads, who says, my daughter, who's friends with MacKenzie, has come to me and told me this, and I think you need to know. And he shares with John that MacKenzie's in an online relationship with someone from overseas and is planning to leave the country. At that time, in as little as 2 weeks, is what he thought. So again, you know, God's blessing of John being thousands of miles away, he calls me that night, and normally, like you said, normally we would have marched in there and said, what are you doing? You know, and kind of tried to lock all this down. But in that 24 hours or so it took for John to get home, I did hide the passports, which was the first thing to do. But then in that 24 hours, we had enough time to kind of think, and this girl that had come forward and 2 others, all within 48 hours, that went to their parents, and their parents made phone calls to us.
All of her friends just trying to go ahead and tell.
3 different friends, yes, went to their parents. They also said that MacKenzie had indicated to them that if she found out we knew, she was prepared to leave immediately.
Okay.
And so we knew then she would bolt. I had the passport, so for a while we thought, well, she could leave, but she'd have to stay within the country. And then it's another story, but I figured out she had ordered a second passport. So then I knew the window that we thought we had could be gone.
Could you explain your mindset, your frame of reference, your perspective on, you know, are you questioning yourself as a mother, a good mother, a
Absolutely.
good father, parenting? Did we not do the right thing? What's happening to you?
Yes,
in this
all
moment?
of those things at once. You know, the positive was at least all the pieces begin to fall into place.
Why she's behaving this way.
Yes, and that was what we had been treating as rebellion. We suddenly realized, you know what, she's a victim. And she doesn't know she's a victim. She's being manipulated. She's in severe danger. So our tactic then changed a little bit, whereas before we were just kind of butting heads with her constantly, as you do with teenagers. And so we then realized from a victim standpoint, we had to approach this very differently. And we had two things really. Number one, we had to stop her from leaving. And if that meant grabbing her at that moment and just holding her back, that's what we would have to do. But the bigger issue was really stopping her wanting to go.
Yeah.
Because we
It's
could
the
only
issue of
stop
the
her
heart.
physically
Right.
once, twice, you know, who knows. But eventually, whatever net we could put over her, she would eventually work her way through. And by this time, she had turned 18.
Yeah.
So legally, you know, we had limited things that we could do. We did all the things that any good, loving parent would do, put a GPS in her car, you know, all those kinds of things to track her down.
How did the FBI find out about all this, though? Did you call the FBI?
Yes, well, what we did, and again, you know, God played such a hand in this from the very beginning, in that real quickly, 20 years ago, we met a couple that we have been lifelong friends with ever since. Fast forward 20 years, here we sit with this going on. It's within the 4 walls of our house, scared to tell anyone, because if anybody finds out and it gets back to her, she's gone. And we decided we would confide in this friend's name was Steve, because Steve, in God's wisdom, worked in security at DFW Airport. And we said, if there's anybody that can help us, it'll be Steve. So we spend our 29th wedding anniversary in Steve's house.
Sorry.
Steve's house, sitting there kind of crying through this with him, telling him what's going on. He said, you know, I don't know exactly what we can do, but I will stop by and talk to the chief of police at DFW Airport. So he didn't know him personally, but he was willing as God works through people, right? And he was willing to go and take that step, just to open his door, knock, say, can I have a minute of your time? Shared the story with him, and that the chief of police said, I don't know what's going on, but it does sound like she could be in pretty severe danger. So let me connect y'all with the FBI at DFW Airport.
Wow.
So they called, and we went out there and sat and met with them. And I'm an accountant by trade, so I had my files in order, right? Everything was hole punched and, paper clipped together, and I laid out all the evidence, so to speak, that we had. And they were concerned enough to say, we'll help you.
Yeah, because this is really the face of human trafficking, the face of kidnapping in this day and age is via the internet.
Yes.
And it's happening not only to our daughters, it's happening to our sons. What things do you think, is there something you could have done, you think?
Yeah.
Two questions I have for you. One of them, is there something looking back that you feel like you could have done? Because you said this was on her phone mostly. So it's so hard because we live in a day and age where it's a technological age. We're trying to navigate, how do we keep our children safe with the reality that it is the century that we live in, the day and age that we live in. They're gonna have a phone at some point.
Right.
So is there anything you could have navigated differently, you think?
I think in looking back, from a technology standpoint, we did, I think, all we could do.
Yeah.
And then I did go, as she got 18, you can't.
Yeah.
There's only, how many thousands of texts do they do a day? To me to go through those would have taken hours, But the one thing I think, not from a technology standpoint, and I try to say this where it makes sense, but to educate her in a different way. Okay, we've always told our kids, don't talk to strangers, don't accept friends and requests from people that you don't really know. But that doesn't really sink in because kids today think if I'm talking to somebody
they are my
or
friend.
online, they're my friend, and I'd be able to tell if he was a creepy guy or if he had bad intentions. So I think, for example, when MacKenzie tells her story now, we often have, almost every time she speaks, she has girls come up that are in the same situation.
Or guys too.
Or doing something similar because they see it and they're educated in a different way.
Right.
They see and hear the manipulative techniques that he uses. They hear and see that she's kind of a normal girl and got wrapped up in this. She's not like she's a wallflower. She was dating someone at the time. It's not like she had never dated and no one had ever told her she was
earlier. It ended
partly when it
through.
first started. So as girls hear the story and learn from that standpoint, they see it differently.
Right.
And so my younger boys who lived this, they have a whole different respect for talking to a stranger online than MacKenzie ever did.
Can you tell me how you worked on her heart? For the parent that's saying, you know what, like you said, I can't read every text message and I can't make them not want to, or I can only put the net in place for so long before, if their heart's not tenderized, they're gonna break right through that boundary. And so how are you able, this is 3.5 years. You've got a young woman sitting here that is completely different than the young lady y'all are describing from just 3.5 years ago. So how is MacKenzie's heart softened?
Yes, I think two things. First of all, we told her throughout the whole time, even when we were struggling and didn't know what was going on, we constantly told her, we love you too much to sit back and not do anything. So even though we got rolled eyes and we got, and as she says, when he said, I love you, that meant more to her than when we said it, but you still say it. Constantly say it. But probably more importantly was the way we say it is we never, and it was intentional, we never burned the bridge between us and her. We never threw our hands up and said, fine, if you're gonna do this, then blah, or we can't have you in the house if you're gonna be like that. We never took that stand of an ultimatum or anything like that that would make her not want to come back. And our idea was, somewhere down the road, if she ever has the veil lifted and she ever realizes what she's in and she wants to turn back and come back home, that she wouldn't have to come crawling back. She wouldn't
realized
have
there were open arms there.
Yeah, the prodigal son is that, my husband even shared that story with her in the midst of all this before we knew what was really going on. That, she was going somewhere. She was away from the family. She was doing her thing, and we would always welcome her back. And I think that made a difference when it came time for her to really say, I need help. I need out of this, and I need help.
But what did you need to do in those first weeks, those first months where her heart was hardened and she was still wanting to stay connected with that guy, talk to him online?
After the FBI, but she still was connected?
Yes. Practically, what did that look
Well,
like?
I can say that.
Okay.
So it sounds kind of like dumb, but I had a cat, and I loved this cat like so much, and she was like basically like my best friend that I kept having. Like anything that I couldn't tell my friends, I'd tell my cat. And just like long story short, she was looking really sick. This was after the FBI had come to my house, just a couple days after, or probably 2 weeks or so. She was looking kind of sick, and I went to my mom and I said, hey, something's wrong with her, and we took her to the vet.
Her name is Angel, by the way,
Angel.
which is
Her
very
name is
appropriate.
Angel.
We took her to the vet. They said nothing's wrong. Well, that night she ended up dying, and it was crushing to me. But that was kind of the first moment that I actually leaned on my mom and my dad for the first time in a year. And then we actually had a meeting with Agent Sheridan in just a couple hours, and we went to that meeting, and he said, okay, MacKenzie, if you tell him, this was like the last meeting. There's really nothing else they could tell me. And he said, but I will tell you that if you text him, Adam, and you say, there's nothing I can do for you, there's no way I can bring you here on any sort of visa or anything, you're gonna have to figure this out on your own. He will come back and tell you, well then you come to Kosovo, we'll get married and come back to the US. So on the way home, I actually did text him that. So there's nothing I can do. And he texted me back verbatim what the FBI agent told me he would say. And that was kind of my first realization
Your eyes are opening a little
that this may not be what I think it is. And later that night, I was actually talking to my mom, and I kind of had this moment of clarity. And I kind of think of it, if you watch like a war movie, and then after the battle's over, and there's just like smoke and debris everywhere, and just like destruction. I kind of looked around, and that was my life. I didn't have my friends, my family, my faith. My whole life was just in shambles. And I realized that that's not what love is. Love should not do this to me or any person that I love. And that night I told him, I'm tired, I was so tired of lying and trying to constantly cover my tracks and fighting with my parents. And I told him this is not something I can do anymore. And that was it. And the next day, I still had to work through, is basically.
Sure, because your heart's tangled up.
It
so
was.
You've got to work through that.
And it was another year and a half, really, of me trying to find my purpose of why this happened and where am I going with this. And
Do you realize the danger that you would have been in? Now looking at it, you know how sometimes you can go through a season of your life where it's not until you're out of it, looking at yourself in it, that you go, what was I thinking?
Oh yeah, yeah. Now, of course, and even every few months, I kind of have another realization of something that he had said or had done that kind of ties in with the bigger picture, how I was manipulated and stuff like that. So it's still a learning process, but I found my purpose. We speak to high schools and to churches and stuff like that, and I am able to. Somebody asked me, what is the best thing that came out of this? Something so awful. And it's so that I can look at young youth and say, this is what I did. You don't do this, and hopefully save some lives in the process.
Yes, absolutely, you will. And your book will too. People need to get their hands on this. And, parents, listen, I was saying earlier at the beginning of this program, my boys are in those teenage years now. This is the major sort of wrestling match with me and my husband and the boys, because we're just trying to navigate the age that we live in.
Right.
With wanting to keep them safe. It is so hard. This is
Yes.
so complicated. Every time we put another boundary in place, there's just another little caveat right over here we didn't even know existed.
Exactly, and the kids are ahead of us.
They're so ahead of us.
Yeah.
But you can't outsmart it.
Right. One of the very first times we spoke, a young man who was 18, was a senior in high school, he came up and he said, Miss Baldwin, I have to tell you something. He said, I certainly haven't been through something like MacKenzie went through. He said, but I'm a gamer. And I've probably got 30 or 35 friends that I call friends, that I game for several years. And he said, if one of them had said, hey, let's all drive down south to Waco or something and let's meet up, he said, I wouldn't have thought twice about it until now. And now I realize I don't really know them. Mm-hmm. I said, that's what we're doing this for.
Right.
Yeah,
That's what this is about. And MacKenzie phrases it very well. We're not telling people not to game. You can even call them your friends. But the friendship ends when the console goes off. It doesn't go beyond that.
Yeah.
And you can talk to them all you want online, but don't let it cross that line.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys so much. We're going to spend some more time with you guys. In part 2, we're going to continue to talk to them, but we're going to add a beautiful couple to our conversation. They have made it their business, their ministry to sort of help parents be equipped, help teenagers, all of us really be equipped to sort of have our mindsets on right when we're looking at the internet, at social media, at how to protect ourselves and make sure that we get the benefits of it while keeping ourselves safe at the same time. But for now, would you guys please help me to thank them so much for telling me our story. We're so glad you're safe. We're so glad you're safe.
Me too.